Hello guys, welcome back to my channel and enjoy this fanfic part 2. And God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept, and he took one of his ribs, and closed up the flesh instead thereof, and the rib, which God had taken from man, made he a woman, and brought her unto the man. -2. 21-22, Book of Genesis, Catholic Bible. The next morning began his official stay with the Senju, and the first thing that changed was how he was treated. It was not worse per se. He was taken care of as usual, perhaps even more delicately. But it was clear from the tiptoeing of their feet, the glances out of the corners of their eyes, and the conspiratory whispers they thought he didn't hear that the servants were simultaneously curious and scared stiff of him. He figured some of them must have gotten caught in his cage feudo. That as well as the noisy spectacle he had engineered just the day before. He had no doubt he had become the latest gossip for the Senju clan grapevine. Kenji came to him first thing in the morning, wearing the face of a man who wasn't sure whether he was walking up the stair to heaven or through the gate of hell itself. He was afraid of the woman who had threatened to pull his brain out of his skull and scribble on it, yet excited at the prospect of new knowledge. They did a test to see how much work was in store for them, the medic promptly brightening up at the hint of techniques he was required to know and would subsequently need to learn. Naruto discovered with much delight that the medic wasn't half bad. In fact, he was far more competent than he had previously thought. Granted, Kenji's chakra control was abysmal and his knowledge of working Iryo Jutsu was at ground zero, but that was to be expected since the use of chakra wouldn't yet be introduced to mainstream healers for a few more decades and the creation of Iryo Jutsu even later. Aside from this, Naruto could find no other fault. No work was required of him in the fields of human anatomy, neural and root nerve map, and chemical usage. The man clearly deserved his position as head medic of a major ninja clan. Finally, the list came down to chakra training, precision training, Iryo Jutsus of the surveillance and stasis types, chakra scalpel and string, medical aid Fuin Jutsu, and the needed surgical procedures. On the second day of their training, the head medic came in with a horde of students of his own, all eager since they didn't have the threat of lobotomized brain on their heads, and determined to make the most out of that weird healer woman. They crowded at his door in the patch of hallway outside his window, elbowing each other and scribbling furiously on their notebooks. By the fourth day, this same horde had dwindled down to about a handful of the most advanced, not student but Kenji's peers, who struggled to keep up. Naruto drove them hard, using a combined tactic of whip and candy on their male egos, their competitiveness and one-upmanship to get the most out of them. At the end of the week, the Senju brought in a seal master, an old woman who was reputed to learn the art of sealing from her late husband. They cleared the rest of the day, washed him early and laid him out for the old woman. When they were done, he requested another seal, one of a mind link and transfer type, a Fuin derivation of the Yamanaka's ninpo, between him and his students. The old woman could only be too happy to oblige since this was considered an S-class seal and wouldn't be invented for another 90 years if his memory was correct. The medics were relieved since this would take care of the theoretical part of their training in a matter of minutes. At least, this was until he told them that the user of the Soki Ritsu no Fuin ran a 2% chance of brain hemorrhage and would be out of commission for the next day out of severe headache caused by the strain. Their training went on as the second day after the sealing proved that none of his students were caught with the 2% of bad luck. Second week, they cleared out a room several doors away from his, converting it into a small but well-equipped infirmary and started bringing in patients. This would both make maximum use of the medics' time since they were still on clan duty, and provide them with training dummies for hand-on practices. Not wanting any more incidents with the Senju, Naruto monitored them carefully, using his cage feudo to guide the medics through complicated steps and to prevent any regrettable accidents from happening. They progressed slowly but surely, and though there were problems along the way, inane posturing, chauvinistic attitude, petty politics, they were eventually overcome with the aid of electrocution, tentacles, in the name of all the women he loved who all happened to be closet sadists, and more lobotomized brains. At the same time with his preparation of the medics, Naruto kept up his surveillance of the Senju. And since the get-go, it was clear that he wasn't alone in his watching. The Senjus too were keeping tabs on him, albeit it seemed to be more out of personal choice than on order. This gave him questions as to what exactly had Yoshizawa Senju told his clansmen about the strange woman currently sharing the same basement with them. He doubted the Senju head would divulge the entirety of the truth, keeping faces and all that, but how much of the deal was known to the normal Senju nin and their non-combat forces? Did they see him as a temporary add-on to their clan? A guest? A prisoner? What did those medic apprentices think he was? A strange boon they weren't allowed to know the origin of. An expired but still greatly knowledgeable medic. Did they know what his seal could do? Were they ordered not to touch him? Whatever the answers to these questions might be, it was unlikely that he'd ever find out. For the first time ever, he was seeing the turning wheels and mechanics of a true ninja clan before the era of the hidden villages in action. Apparently, the architecture of such ancient organizations, while stable and generally trust-encouraging between clan members, also included a big dose of xenophobia. In this case, Naruto found himself as that alien Xeno, that little wrench in a well-oiled machine, the mole that was needed but not really wanted. In the beginning, they kept their distance, appearing from afar, sometimes ghosting by his window. The mere fact that he could see some of their faces from his bed told volume of their underestimation of him. Which could only be good. The expressions on their faces varied. Some were openly curious. He was probably a novelty to these. Some were guarded, as standoffish as the Hyuga of his time, and a select few who wore a certain edge of scheming in their eyes that put worry in his mind and more subterfuge seals on the ground of his room. By the third week, they'd grown much bolder and more lax in their guard. One, a young man, dark eyes, dark hair, and missing half of an ear, stood by his window one morning, watching as he instructed the medics. On another day, another, a light brunette this time, was at his door, exchanging pleasantries with the training dummy for a whole afternoon. And more came. Gradually, he started seeing a pattern in their visits. An increasing encroachment on his territory. They never directly addressed him nor held eye contact with him. They only watched from the sidelines, giving whatever reasons to excuse their presence there. What for? He had thought. Psychological war. To show who was in control here. Intimidation tactics. Could be. Their actions were openly flaunting the fact that he was alone here, surrounded by droves of them, all of whom were related to each other. Were they trying to wear him down little by little? While the chances for this were slim, he wouldn't put it past their crafty leader. Though the man wore the face of the pacifistic Hiruzen Sarutobi, his thinking seemed to be more in line with one Danzo Shimura. On a whim, or perhaps not, he'd captured one particularly irritating Senju, the gambling trouble Ichi, which turned out to be short for Ichikawa, with some creative and sneaky use of his cage fudo, made him strip down to his birthday suit and dance the hoochie coochie in the open hallway, much to the horror of bystanders. His version of a middle finger back at Ya. His repercussion came the next day when Hashirama Senju, in his usual visit, asked him in his gentle but firm voice to please leave the loincloth on next time, because apparently he terrified the servant women. He'd laughed long and hard before telling the boy that it wasn't really his fault and that he was terrified too, to which the Senju had replied, not missing a beat and in the same voice, that he didn't think Naruto was the type who could be terrified by that. Still, he got what he wanted. The Senju gave him some breathing room after this incident. They understood the message behind his action. Here is my line. Don't overstep it, he'd said, or next time it won't be something silly. On the other hand, though their crowding presence uneased him, they brought with them a great opportunity. He learned much of their clan just by observing them. First, there seemed to be a class system among the ninja, identified by their armors, their clothes, and the weapons they wore, even in the protection of their home. A sort of intra-army social structure. Those of higher ranks wore comparatively more sophisticated armors, sets full of chainmail and cuirass. Their weapons indicated their category. Compound bows, slings, and boomerangs for long-range type, katana, wakizashi and ninjutsu for close range, hamagari, hikigen, nekote, and what looked like pouches of powder, poison. Powder grenade. For specialists. They all acted according to their ranks. Second, they followed a certain schedule when they weren't out on missions. This same schedule seemed to apply for the whole clan. Those that came in the late morning and early afternoon were usually sweaty, with the telltale beginning of bruises blossoming on their bodies. Taijutsu practice. In contrast, the ones that came in late afternoon wore a variety of signs: caked mud on their sandals, singed sleeves, wet clothes and hair. Ninjutsu study. Weapon practice seemed to be of a personal schedule as indicated by the erratic coming and going of those with fresh cuts and scratches on their hands. All of these pointed to a system much closer to mainstream military than of ninja-style management, but he supposed it fit. After all, before the hidden village system, ninja clans like this were purported to operate as self-armed militias rather than purely ninja faction. Third, this was a barrack in the truest sense of the word. He deduced this from the second point and from the fact that aside from the servants who were mostly middle to old age, he had not seen a woman in the rank of the senju. They were all men, young to middle age, at the peak of their time. The wives weren't here. The children weren't here. The grandparents, assuming that they were alive, weren't here. This was a wholly militaristic settlement. The true bulk of their population, those that weren't of fighting age or disposition, lived elsewhere. Fourth, they were afraid of their clan heir. This was the one point that he couldn't quite grasp and had many times called doubt to his reasoning. Instances that showed this were rare and not very obvious, but every time he witnessed it, a frightening sense of déjà vu tugged at his mind. The first time was when one of Hashirama's visits had coincided with the leaving medics. In the narrow door frame where the group met the heir, the medics had parted like the Red Sea around him. It was not out of respect or formality, not with the way their bodies had curled in, shrinking inward and away from the air, as if he could hurt them by touch alone. A pass in the hallway with one of his watchers. They were polite, both of them, painfully so. The sort of polite one would expect to see in a meeting between the mediators of two rivaling countries. A cheap veneer of bows, distances and honorific, of sans and samas and other nonsense that simultaneously covered and screamed, "This is bullshit," at anybody with eyes and the guts to look. It was puzzling. It was eerily similar to his Jinchuriki childhood. There was something very off about this whole circus act, and it wasn't just the boy and his father. Why? It would make more sense if the senju were to fear their leader, for fear was as good a tool to control as any. But this was a mere boy. Granted, he was the designated heir to the clan, but from what he'd seen, Hashirama never seemed to take advantage of his princeling status. The senju heir was polite even to the servants. Was it his radical ideals? Or the obvious and recurring disagreement between father and son? Some festering family secret deliberately erased from history? He didn't know, and he wasn't sure if he wanted to know. He pushed these questions to a corner of his mind, covering them with a metaphorical dust jacket. He couldn't deny that there was a niggling but growing feel of suspension, of suspicion, like sleeping on wet blanket, like something he would hate to know but needed to know nonetheless. Despite this, rationality dictated he hadn't the time to poke his nose where it wasn't wanted, or needed. He had enough on his plate to worry about: getting his body back to working order, securing insurance, in case Yoshizawa or one of his loyal Anbu predecessors decided to get nasty. Scouting the situation of the world he was in, finding allies, fixing his female problem, because he sure as hell wasn't going to let his body remain as it was, finding and infiltrating the Uchiha clan, and finally, a date between him, a certain Uchiha, and the biggest Rasenshuriken he could make without going demon. For this part at least, history had turned out fine. The young heir would grow into a powerful shinobi and a leader to his people. He'd already changed one major event, that of Hashirama's coming into leadership of the Senju clan and the death of Yoshizawa. He had no doubt that this would reduce his advantage of knowing certain things before they happened. So for the time being, he better steered clear of all historical events. What he needed to do right now was focus on the medic's training. At least, this was what he planned to do until sometimes halfway into the second month. It was late night. He knew something was wrong the moment the Senju heir was in the room. No, he knew before that. 2 days precisely, for that was the time when Hashirama had ceased his visiting. It took him another minute to realize what was wrong. It was inky dark outside. The torch light was dimmed by the cold, its licks of fire running thin on dry air. The mirror had since stopped reflecting the sun, and there was no moon this night. It was another point to highlight the difference between now and his time. Here, the night came early and was all-encompassing. In this mountain, separated from civilization and its basic comfort, and this deep underground, there was nothing to combat it but a few torches mounted on the wall. The young Senju stood by the closed door, shrouded in the shadow, and was silent. His posture said all he did not say. Naruto didn't bother asking what was wrong, instead, what he said was, "Come closer." There was movement in the dark, and the rustling sound of cloth to accompany it. The Senju stayed in the shadow, away from the single globe of lamp light in the room. He replied, "I smell bad. You didn't say that last week. I could have swum in your sweat then." A pause as he considered. "I can't see you. Come into the light." Still, Hashirama stayed rooted in his place. His brown eyes gleamed in the dark, reflecting the light in pinpricks of red. It was obvious he wasn't going to come, unless Naruto did something extreme. And that was exactly what he did. "How many people did you kill today?" "Bingo." The young Senju stiffened, then flinched. His jaws and neck jerked as though he wanted to look away. He shifted on his feet, about to turn and leave. Naruto knew what was in the boy's head. He'd been through it himself. Contrary to what the civilians like to think, first kills, though they carry their own brand of trauma, weren't the earth-shaking events often depicted in their heavily romanticized novels, nor were they the frenzied affair of testosterone, tits, oversized male and power trips as dreamed up by hordes of serialized civilians. In that first moment of birth, the first drop of blood, the first hitch of breath, the first kiss of death, reality had yet to set in. That dead body was just a mark, a thing that had ceased to be human the moment its face turned up on the mission scroll. All the killer could feel then, not despair, not guilt, not disgust, not even the onset of a new philosophical worldview. All he could feel was just the pump of adrenalines in his ears, the sharply sweet tang of mort, the sight of the dead man's last erection, the euphoria of having completed his first real mission, of having become a man, a real shinobi serving his village. In the far distance, a sound, like glass breaking in the next room. More kills would soon follow, and though the thrill was still there, it would eventually dim and become just another routine. Like the hundreds of ninjas before him, the killer settled in line. After all, he was nothing special, and there was nothing special about his marks either. And the Anbu said, "It's all business, babe." It was only until the first death of someone he knew that reality came knocking at his door. The killer looked down at the familiar body, maybe a friend, maybe a woman he'd shared his bed with, maybe more, and he recognized something. This was the same wound he'd put on his mark. Now all of a sudden, his past kills were put to a new perspective. Emotions stirred. Anger, grief, fear, disgust, confusion. He struggled. He raged. He fought. And slowly, the killer awakened to a new awareness. At first, he was alone in his knowledge, unable to do anything but watch as others slumbered. Then another, hopefully a friend, stirred. And another. And another. And soon he was no longer alone. Despite this, there was no agreement among the awakened. No secret brotherhood. No talk. They kept to themselves, stuck by their machismo image, each finding his own way to cope with the two facets of his life. On one side, the killer, on the other, the civilian. Life went on. They woke up to the beat of a new morning, drank their coffee, ate their toast, turned in their report, went the usual 9 to 5 with the Genin kids, booze and boobs in bars in their happy hour, threw up in the back alleyways. They learned that being a good killer, or as they said in the folly of their youth, the baddest motherfucker on earth, didn't give them better lives, didn't make them better people. Superb fighting skill, it turned out, had nothing to do with being happy. After the glory, there were only dust and bones. Life turned its dusty wheel as though nothing happened. But there were times, as their eyes met over the lid of a new coffin, over the bundles of well-wishing flowers by the hospital bed, over the candle glow of a birthday cake celebrating surviving yet another year, and they'd know that the other knew, that they all knew the same thing, knew what lay beneath that normal exterior they wore to work every day, and that it was best left unsaid. For all his self-made unpredictability and his insanity, Naruto had never dreamed he would one day saw that look from the face of Hashirama Senju, of all people. In retrospect, that was downright dumb. All ninjas killed, including godly ninja of the past. Especially godly ninja of the past. So there should be no surprise except you're not supposed to be like this, old man Hokage. This is too pathetic. Fuck this shit. You were supposed to be a living saint. A killer and a saint, wrapped in the same skin, wearing the same face. Two for the price of one. No holds barred. Set price, sir. No bargaining. You take one, you take both. Except they had been worshipping a make-believe god. And now, 100 years into the past, the faithful follower was finding that, apparently, his god bled mortal blood. But there was no time to ponder on that. The boy was already turning, his hand going for the door. Naruto had to do something. Are you going to run away from me, like you did to every other asshole who called you monster behind your back? That did the job. Hashirama stopped abruptly, his back rigidified as if someone had poured lead over it. He turned slowly. Unruffled, Naruto held out his hand to the air, palm upward in a beckoning gesture. Come to me, stupid boy, who do you think I am? A weak woman. I'm not afraid of you. The weight of Hashirama's stare was needles on his skin, on his face, on his outstretched hand. He could feel the emotions burning behind it. Anger, for the first time aimed at Naruto. Shock, violation, wariness, a bone-deep exhaustion. Yet he waited, patiently, faithfully. He was stubborn more than he was patient. He could wait until morning if it was needed. He kept his stare level on the Senju clan heir, keeping a wordless conversation between them. Trust me. If you can go against your father for me, then you can trust me. The standstill lasted for a few minutes before the first crack appeared. He could almost see the minuscule frown marring the dark contour of the Senju's pinprick gaze shifted from him to the tile floor, where the vines of his cage feudo lay dormant, then back up at him again, bringing with it a tinge of puzzled realization. See, I didn't bind you. I could have, but I didn't. Now take the step. That's it. Keep looking at me. Don't look at the window, you're not gonna jump over there, look at me. The crack widened. Then a movement, tiny and unsure, but it was there. Like a man walking on drunken legs, the Senju made his first step toward Naruto, dragging one leg before the other, the tip of his sandaled feet peeking into the circle of light. Then he stopped. His gazing face, from the other side of the room, half in the shadow, half in the light, was frightfully young, and carved onto it was a visual cacophony of fear, hope, doubt, longing, disbelief. Out of sheer experience of having worn that same face himself, Naruto recognized it for what it was. The Senju was waiting for the first sign of revulsion, of denial of fellow creature, waiting for that hand to drop. The look was all wrong on his face. It shouldn't even be there at all. But the fact that it was there made Naruto wanted to rage, to spit fire, to go berserker mode, to crawl out of that bed and rip the major asses that had put that look on the boy's face in the first place. But more important than that was now. This was the moment of newborn trust, fragile in its birthing hour, and he better not screw it up. He stayed very still and waited, like the tamer waiting for the wild creature to come to him on its own. Hesitantly, another step was made, only slightly longer than the first. The Senju glanced at the window again, then at the door, and finally at the seal on the floor, ready to bolt at any moment. Then a third step, a little longer. The fourth step followed right behind as if he didn't want to change his mind, like a man about to bungee jump with rope instead of elastic lifeline and thought it was too late for second thoughts. That brought him within arm's length of Naruto. He reached out, taking the boy's hand in his. The chakra sparked, and all of a sudden the boy was on his knees, gasping. Sit down, Naruto instructed him. He kept a tight grip on the boy, steadying him. The hand holding the Senju glowed a pale purple. First timer, he thought, staring back at the Hashirama's wide shocked eyes. Must be pretty overwhelming. Especially when it was his Senchakra that was running through the other system. Feels nice, doesn't it? He asked, taking the young Senju's slackening expression for a yes. It's used to calm hysteric patients. Feels like you're asleep in a good bed except that you're awake. Your body is resting but your mind is still up and running. Takes a good bit of chakra but it's pretty nifty for post-combat stress. He lifted the hand he was holding up, studying it under the yellow lamp light. It was rough with calluses upon calluses, peppered with tiny splinters left from his battle. The wrist and forearm was encased in dagger-mounted leather vambrace. Long fingers, almost 1/2 longer than his. The skin was a deep tan compared to his new pale cream. The smell of grass and burned flesh still clung to it, as fresh as the memory he was sure. With a few deft flicks of his fingers, he undid the vambrace, letting it drop with a mute thud to the floor. The skin revealed was red and tender with welts from being bound for too long. He pressed a thumb over the wrist vein, counting the heart rate. It beat a mild, near resting 82 BPM and slowing. The Senju was calm and appeared to be unharmed. But just to be extra sure, he laid a hand above the boy's heart, over the brim of his chest plate, and sent in a prober. Hashirama shuddered under his hand. The signal came back clear. Chakra was on the low. Some bruises and cuts but no major wound. No poison. No weird worms either. All was good. But what was next? Before he could decide, however, the Senju had spoken up for the second time, and the first time on his own accord, since entering the room. Why are you doing this? Naruto looked at him, or more specifically at the familiar upward tilt of his eye corners. Just like the granddaughter. Doing what? Heal him. Help with the post-killing stress. Be the coper. He didn't like the expression on the boy's face. It was one that hinted that this was the first time that something like this happened. And that was all wrong in a place like this. Clan-type militias were supposed to foster brotherhood and sharing, or it was no different from a band of mercenaries. And since Naruto was never one to beat around the bush, he went head-on with his suspicion. That's not the question you want to ask, he declared, knowing full well that this would not be easy. And I'm not the one you want to ask either. Let me rephrase it for you. Here's what you really want to know. Why did you come here, to me, instead of to your brothers, your cousins, or even your father when you are so obviously distressed? No reply. And by this, he knew he was right in his growing suspicion. He felt like someone had gripped a meaty hand around his neck. This couldn't be what he thought it was. Please let it not be. Why did you come? No reply. You didn't want me to see you. What were you hiding? No reply. Did you think I'd take pity on you? Are you in the habit of flaunting your vulnerability? Did you think that'd get you attention? The Senju was stoically silent. Once again, Naruto felt that red thread stretching in his mind. A spark sizzled hotly somewhere in his belly. This felt a bit like talking to a wall, or Sasuke in his brooding mode. He closed his eyes so that he didn't have to see the boy's face shivered with micro flashes of emotion, all of them negative, all of them ugly. That's what you are to them, isn't it? Not a fellow human or clan member but a war hound with the handy blood limit no one else has. You hate them but you can't leave them. They are all you know. The boy's hand grew cold in his. His own other hand rose and fell on his softly quivering belly. That's why you keep coming to me, isn't it? Because I don't know what you are or what you can do. You think you can make me fall in love with your goody two-shoe boy next door act. Would that make you feel less like a monster? A second pause as he considered before asking, how many people before me? Again, the boy offered no answer, but his silence alone was telling testament of his guilt. So, this is Hashirama Senju. Naruto muttered, feeling something bitter burned in his stomach. You're not who I thought you to be. He felt the boy made to stand up, to leave. He tightened his hold. Sit down. His voice was soft, but there was an undeniable weight to it. His Hokage voice. No one walked away from Naruto Uzumaki, not even the Shadaime. I'm thinking. And he was. He scoured the maelstrom of thoughts in his head, seeking comprehension in the violent chaos. He did not know what to think or how to feel about this new revelation. That Hashirama Senju, the reputedly gentle, compassionate, and wise Hokage, was a fraud. After the months of isolation in a constantly hostile environment, months of being imprisoned in a body that was weak and was not his, months unable to tend to his emotional injury before his failed last battle, he was exhausted. His heart was all but numb. But this was on a level all of its own. Patiently, he filtered his squabbling thoughts, one by one. An image came to his mind. The statues of the Valley of the End. Before these two giants of stone and legend, he had felt as small and insignificant as the moss that grew on their stone toes. He was 16 then, freshly crowned Hokage, and secretly afraid of what lied ahead. Looking up at the harsh plains of Shadaime's face, he had thought, this old guy built the whole world. And later on, when he was a little less sober, he created me, which might not be entirely wrong because after all, what was Naruto Uzumaki but a mishmash of ninja, Biju, Konoha, gut and stubbornness, and the will of fire ideal. Nearly all of these were either spawns of or greatly influenced by the first Hokage. Now, to have his suspicion confirmed, and in such a fashion. That peace might not have been the first reason for the creation of Konoha, and the exalted will of fire might have been a little closer to political propaganda than it should have been. What are you thinking? Asked the boy, unknowingly reminding Naruto that he was still there, this smaller version of the Shadaime. Rarer too, and more real than both his statues and his textbook pictures. I'm thinking that you must have bitten me when I wasn't looking, or I don't know, maybe it was I who bit you. I'm feeling pretty crazy right now. And gave you the pretentious attention deficit boy syndrome. Damn it. What would Tsunade think? Who knows? You and I, we seem to have the same disease. He replied automatically, somewhat surprised by the honesty of his own words. It was impossible not to notice the similar stocks the majority of Hokages had come from. Orphan, growing up alone and amidst wartime, traumatic childhood, neglect, possessing great power at absurdly young ages, loved their subjects to the point of suicidal. When viewed under a psychoanalysis scope, such love was diagnosed as the product of their inability to deal with inner inadequacies and deemed self-destructive. To Naruto, the understanding was on much simpler terms. When one was born with nothing, one learned to love everything in the hope that one day, this love would be reciprocated. The exceptions to these, of course, were the two first Hokages, Shadaime and Nadaime, one of which was sitting at the foot his bed and he was nothing like his successors. This boy wasn't an orphan. He didn't grow up alone, neglected and discriminated. He had a family. He had a brother who loved him and succeeded his legacy. According to history text, in a few years, not long, he'd have a wife, and in another few years, his own children who adored him. Even before falling to this time and meeting him in person, Naruto had had doubts. Even with years into the alliance with the other villages, staying in their houses, eating their food, fighting alongside them, he still held a special place in his heart for his village alone. There was no faulting a man for loving his family above all, even when that family was full of psychos, freaks, and killers. The Shadaime, on the other hand, was known for seeing all Konoha citizens, many of whom used to be his enemies and the murderers of his kin, as his own family. On the surface, this sounded generous and righteous, but when one started to question further, what sort of man was capable of loving complete strangers on equal level with his family? With his wife, brother, and children? If such love was true, then what did that say about the family? What did that say about the man himself? His eyelids fluttered open, then winced at the suddenly overpowering light. He blinked once, turned his head and saw the boy. For a moment he couldn't link the two images in his head. This boy, young and confused, waiting patiently by his bed like a prisoner waiting for the judge's verdict, and the demigod Konoha had worshipped for some 90 years. Just what sort of person was Hashirama Senju? And just what the hell was Naruto going to do with him? On second thought, did it matter? Was he going to go all the way 100 years into the past, forsaking his world, himself, paying the fare in blood, sweat, and loss, just to falter here? Because of a little doubt. Because he had been expecting a god but had received a mortal instead. Because of the tiny possibility that Konoha might have been the rich fruit of a cancerous tree. Did any of those questions and suspicions bouncing in his head really matter? Fuck no. So what if Hashirama Senju wasn't the pristine saint he was supposed to be? Who could claim to be pure in the world of ninja? No one. That was who. So what if his will of fire wasn't the idealistic one for all in all for one philosophy it was touted to be but the mere product of an alienated and neglected childhood, just like 3 out of the remaining 5 Hokages? The one thing that mattered was that that boy had believed in it, had made it true and had laid his life down to protect it. He had died not knowing whether his dream and his village were safe, but he had died believing nonetheless. And out of that crazy child's dream had come the first and the strongest ninja village. So who was Naruto to nitpick which tree it had come from and from whence had that tree grown? With these thoughts in his head, a new emotion flooded him. Shame. How could he, for one moment, reacted so childishly? He understood the mechanics behind his own emotions. He had seen his pitiful past and his failures in the boy, and he had become angry and disgusted at the reminder. An emotional knee-jerk reaction of sorts. However, knowing it didn't lessen the damage. He could do better than this. Hey, he called out to the boy, paused for a moment not knowing what to say. Then it came to him. Wanna know my name? A rush of excitement filled him. He realized that he hadn't told another soul his name for some years now. Those that needed to know already knew, and those that didn't know probably did not need to. He felt the words beating from his belly up his heart, up his throat, in his mouth, pushing. My name. Suddenly, he was no longer the world-weary, paranoia-ridden soldier but a young boy. For a brief moment, he was 16 again, not 26 and feeling like 100, and he was yelling his name out loud to the world, Naruto Uzumaki, Naruto Uzumaki. And I'm gonna be the greatest Hokage ever. Believe it. And not skulking in caves, hiding himself like a leper hid his boils. Young, and fragile, and stupid, but also full of possibilities. My name is Naruto. The boy's eyes widened. Don't forget it. No surname. Even in the stirs of his emotional re-baptism he remembered caution. He had no idea if his mother's clan existed in this time, and he'd rather not find out the hard way. The boy's face shivered with flashes of emotions. He could guess what was going through his mind. Names meant honesty. Names meant vulnerability. Names meant connection and acceptance. Names meant acknowledgement. To be accepted for who you were, even if you were a freak of nature or a bearer of demons. It was far harder to kill once you knew their name and who they were. They had become human, not another walking corpse waiting for its face to turn up on a mission scroll. He watched the young Senju leaning back on his crossed legs as if to gain perspective. When he responded, his respond was nothing like Naruto imagined. On the mountain, the first time I took you out, why didn't you kill me? There was a split second when panic overrode him. He knew. Then control kicked in and he was calm again. The Senju was a ninja through and through, even in his moment of vulnerability. He imagined every ninja, No. Every person of this turbulent time must accede to this code of caution in order to survive. He took his time answering, drawing his voice out, showing the boy he was neither alarmed that he knew nor ashamed of what he could have done, of what he didn't do. If you really were going sneak me out, then what would you do once your father asked to see my body? He fixed the boy with a gaze. He knew full well what the only two options for this scenario were. The Senju was either lying to him or he would have to acquire a female corpse as substitute. A fresh corpse. There were a few heartbeats of silence when both knew they were at an impasse, when both saw what the other was, ninja, killer, and human, and that neither of them was giving in. The boy looked down at his lap, pursed his lips, then looked back up at Naruto again. His wood-brown eyes reflected the light in pinpricks of red. You confuse me, he said finally. Well, you ain't the first one to say so, kid. Thought Naruto. He could no longer sleep at night that last month. For the last 2 weeks alone, it seemed as if all of his stress, all of his pressure, and all of his worries were compounded into a thick paste of sweat, fear, frustration, and anxiety, and they hung about him like a shroud. He no longer asked to be taken out to the forest or to the mountain. Everywhere they took him, the Senjus were there, like a throng of black-clad human trees, staring at him with gleaming dark eyes that told nothing of what was in their mind. The fact that he often had to go blind and completely defenseless in front of them was just extra icing. In the dark of his blindness, somehow, he could still feel their gazes on his face, on the back of his neck, on his immobilized body. Even in the sanctuary of his room, he was still rudely invaded. He had gone to sleep one night, exhausted from a long session with the medics, only to be woken up by a sudden spike of nervousness. In the shadow of his ceiling, the white clay face hung like a spider. The pair of eyes behind it stared at him unabashedly. Long after the preambu had gone, he was still wide awake, groping blindly at his bunched sheets with his two-fisted hands. How long had he been watching him? He hadn't yet slept a night since. Coupled with that, he hadn't eaten nor drunk anything but plain water for at least a month now. He had discovered very early on that this new body, though far more enduring than normal human standard, still required regular human sustenance, yet he didn't dare touch the food given to him. To every grumbles his stomach made, his exhausted mind answered with groans of its own. What if they put something in his food? He wasn't immune to all poisons and anesthetics, and even the best immunity can be bypassed with a little creativity and the required knowledge, all of which the Senju medics possessed, one more than others. What would he do if they managed to drug him out cold and throw him out to God knew where? He could try dragging himself on his bare hands, but even then the closest town was hundreds of miles away, even in his time, hundreds of miles, separated by forests and mountains and rivers, clearly not a distance that can be crossed on 2 hands and a broken body. So, with these thoughts in his head, he resigned to turning a deaf ear on the grouses of his stomach cannibalizing itself out, being regenerated, then cannibalizing itself again. His room smelled of him now that he had stayed in for so long. It was as if he had rolled his body, and sweaty and covered with brewer's yeast, all over the floor, the wall, and the ceiling, and left behind an olfactory ghost of himself. His now female scent, familiar and alien all at once, put him in a constant state of unease. It felt as though he wasn't alone in his room but that there was another one lying beside him, lying inside him, breathing as he did. Because he no longer slept, the days lengthened, then blurred altogether into an infinite and indistinguishable flipping of light and dark and light, and dry cool air and screens of dust flying in the reflected sun and the leaching current of his slowly but surely diminishing strength. He marked each of these changing with a swipe to the wall, crossing it with another when today bled into tomorrow, so that he wouldn't lose track of the rapidly fading timeline. Based on the number of crosses carved onto the wall, he still had a long way to go. His room became his glass prison. On the outside, the world, full of light, sound, and color. Inside, him, caged and stripped bare like a zoo animal. There were times when it was all he could do not to crawl off the bed, press himself to the glass wall, and suck in all that muted noises from the outside, the fluttering of 100 whispers in gossip. The slapping of feet on wet stone as the servants scurried by, head held low so that they didn't look him the eye, the hymn of 100 male voices grunting, shouting, laughing, talking, living, the tantalizing scent of wind, and grass, and changing seasons, and red ripe apples, and rushing rivers that somehow, miraculously, managed to penetrate the thick earth upstairs to float all the way down here. It was as though he had become a black hole of life itself, locked in constant hunger for the living. Yet, there were also times when he, rolled up into a flesh ball with his blanket coiling tight over him, wanted nothing more than for them, the whole world, to just shut the fuck up and get the fuck out of his face and leave him to rot in peace. Despite this slow entombment within his room, he clung to it desperately. He built defenses around it like he would a fortress. He laid chameleon seals in the beams, in the cracks between cinder blocks, under the window ledge. He wove traps over the door and under his bed. He sent creeper seals out the hallway. They would tell him if someone passed them by. He would draw seals on his clothing too if they didn't take them away so frequently. Within a few changing of light and dark, his room had become a nest of seals upon seals, all invisible except for the obvious cage feudo. None of them managed to slow his descent. Since the beginning, he had little delusion of his true situation within the Senju clan, which was as precarious as a rock perched halfway out of the brim of a mountainous cliff. He had started out strong and confident, but as time passed and his mind and body steadily deteriorated, he could no longer stop the onslaught of paranoia and doubts from wrecking his mind. What if Yoshizawa had figured out his lie? He'd thought. What if there was a sensor in the ranks of the Senju and he had detected the absence of the promised slow-ticking bomb inside his screwed-up chakra? Better yet, what if his son had told him? What if he had decided that he had had enough of this deal? His entire ransom against the Senju was hinged on this one lie that he was a danger to them if he either died or was left unassisted. He had won the last round against their clan head on nothing but sheer guts and an utter refusal to flip over on his belly and die, but for all his bravado, he knew he would lose what little control he had if even the smallest smudge of doubt managed to get into Yoshizawa's mind. His only chance then was to endure until the operation, whether a success or a failure, freed him from his self-made imprisonment. Once his body was back to working order, he'd have nothing to fear. But even as he repeated this assurance over and over to his feverish mind, he knew he was at his limit. And all the while, the medics watched him. The servant watched him. The Senju ninjas watched him. And he, in turn, drove all his frustration onto the medics, forcing them to learn faster, harder, better. It was in these conditions that the Senju heir, whom he hadn't seen hide nor hair of for several crosses, since their night talk, came back. The boy came quietly through the door, closed it. He said nothing, no greeting, no, how have you been? Instead he headed for the table, pulled it next to the bed, then produced a tin can and a spoon from his coat sleeve. He laid the tin and the spoon on the table, pulled the chair close, sat down facing Naruto. He pried open the lid, picked up the spoon, and, very slowly and deliberately, dipped it into the porridge inside, lifted the content up to his mouth, swallowed without chewing. He pushed the tin can towards Naruto. Dot, dot, dot. The porridge fought a hard passage down his gullet. His shrunken stomach clenched around the new entrance, then bulged painfully. He had eaten too fast, having pounced on the can the moment his drowsy brain realized what the boy was doing. He slowed down, coughed, then picked up the speed again. He finished the porridge far too fast for his liking. He licked the can and the spoon until he was sure there was not a drop of soup left, until even the last salty porky hint was lapped up and there was only the taste of metal on his tongue. Then he licked his fingers. He didn't give a damn that he was doing all this in front of the heir of the Senju clan, in front of the future Shadaime. That well-fed princeling wasn't the one who had to experience his own stomach eating itself out of hunger. He stopped when his fingers finally pruned from all the licking and sucking, then sprawled himself onto the bed. His stomach groaned. The porridge inside warmed his whole body. He curled himself around his protesting belly, moaning a little at the sensation. He had never ever felt such painful sense of satisfaction. Then he remembered that he wasn't alone. He turned his face up only to see Hashirama looking out the window, waiting for something. A servant passed by, paused in front of the window, nodded once. Hashirama nodded back. The servant left. The Senju heir turned back to Naruto, then he uttered one word. Sleep. He blinked once before rubbing his face into his heap of wool blanket. This boy was a Senju, but out of them all, he seemed to be the only one who lived by his own code of honor and honesty. Not very ninja-like, that. He gave half of a thought to protesting, but his eyeballs felt like they had sunk into their sockets and his whole body ached from disuse. He snuggled deeper into the blanket, peeking at the boy with one sleepy eye. From this vantage point, Hashirama sat like a wall, blocking out everything: the dour gray room, the hallway, the light, all the nosy Senjus and their bastard of a leader, even his own heady woman scent. He closed that eye too, then muttered through the blanket. Must be hard being your father. What a naughty son he has. Then he floated upward into the peaceful dark. Dot, dot, dot. The noises of argument stirred him from his sleep. He lay still, teetering between consciousness and unconsciousness. Can't keep doing this, your father, said a voice in hushed agitation. He groaned and moved in his blanket. His eyelids fluttered. The voice stopped. Footsteps. Then something big and warm lay across his eyes and forehead. Keep sleeping. There's a little time yet, it said. He leaned into the thing. What was it saying? He couldn't make head or tail out of the noises, but it was so soothing and he was so tired. The waking world was too painful. He'd like to sleep a bit more. He buried himself deeper into the dark. You're done for, said the voice, sighing. His body jerked as he saw the smile stretching wide on Kenji's face. Success. The medic crowed. His eyebrows shot up under folds of wrinkles and sweat. His fellow medics buzzed excitedly. The news traveled fast, and within an hour there were words back to him that everything would be ready by tomorrow morning. He laid a hand on his belly, feeling the quivers it made. He ate his secret fourth meal, brought to him by the Senju heir, didn't even finish half of it. He thanked the boy, then told him to leave because he knew he wouldn't be able to sleep even with his guarding. He spent the night in silence, making maps of his ceiling. The sun rose in rays of reflected light, casting long shadows over the servants in front of his door. They came in, did the usual ritual, cleaned him in the washroom, clothed him not in yukata but in a clean Samu work shirt and pants, then they took him out. An accompanying Senju ninja performed the obligatory blinding genjutsu on him. The servant walked briskly. He was almost running. Naruto bounced lightly in his hold. His heart beat to the rhythm. When they finally lifted the genjutsu off him, he saw that he was in a domed room, airy and holden with dozens of windows as tall as men, and that he could see the trees and the skies outside. The seals on the floor were medical. The seals on the wall, on the other hand, were a part of even greater containment seals. He spotted the Senju head standing by a window. That's good insurance. That's pretty slick, you know. I can't say you don't know your tricks, he said to the man, defiant to the last moment. He could see the logic in what they were doing. Putting him in an operation room detached from their main compound so that even in the case of failure, he wouldn't bring the whole mountain down on their heads. The containment seals were an extra measure so that any explosion that happened would only be within the contained perimeter. These were high-level seals, extremely chakra demanding. He had no doubt there were dozens of Senjus outside, each maintaining their post as batteries for the seal array. Yoshizawa answered him with a grunt, then turned away to direct his men. He looked through the windows at the crowd milling outside. As expected, the human batteries stood within rings of seals, their faces taut with concentration. Some were already sitting down on the cobblestone floor. They weren't the only ones there. It looked as though half of the Senjus in the compound had concentrated here for today. For the first time ever, he spotted women and children among them. They wore formal clothing and gathered in small groups of 4 to 6, the women's faces heavy with white powder, their hair done up in elaborate coiffures. Kenji was by the door, and standing in front of him were a 30-something woman in a deep blue formal homongi kimono and 3 young children. The woman kept her head down. One child reached out to hold the medic's hand, incomprehension shining in his wide brown eyes. The woman looked up momentarily, saw him through the door. Her eyes widened. She whipped her face down again, biting her sleeve as one big sob shook her whole body. Her red lip paint smeared the blue silk of the kimono. Naruto was suddenly hit by the impact that he must have made on these people's lives. These were the families of the medics and the seal keepers that would partake his operation, here to say goodbye. He breathed in, breathed out, calmed his nerves. This was what he had to do, or even more people would die. He looked for Hashirama in the crowd but couldn't find him. Pity. He had wanted to thank the boy again. He really did owe him his life. When the teary send-off finally ended, the spectator senjus pulled the medic and the seal keepers' families away. Yoshizawa exited the room, exchanging a nod with the incoming medics. Among the group that he had taught, only Kenji and 3 others were here. The rest were young assistants and medic trainees. The senju had decided to keep their reserve. Though it was undoubtedly a good choice, he wondered how that talk, where they decided who would go and who would be kept, had gone through and how the families had reacted. It couldn't have been pretty. An assistant carried him to the gurney in a nexus of seals and laid him on his stomach on it. The seals on the floor hummed softly. The seals on the wall trilled. He felt fingers on his back, drawing the strings of his SAMU suit shirt, then his back was bare and cold in the morning air. Kenji stood by his head, sighed, then drew himself to his full height. He looked Naruto in the eyes and said, "It has not been a pleasant time for me, but you were a good master." Naruto blinked, genuinely surprised. It seemed, faced with death, the medic had decided to throw away all the petty scrambles of life. Before he could reply, they threw a blue-holed cloth over him so that only his lower back and the beginning of his buttock curve were exposed. Anesthetic, someone called. His head was suddenly encased in a balloon of pale blue chakra. He felt his body slackened. An irrational fear hit him then. "Get off the gurney," it said. "Crawl. Run." He realized that he had a very real chance of dying here. If he died here, he would unleash the monstrous Yuki sealed in him into an unsuspecting world, but more important than that, he was afraid. It shamed him to admit it, but he didn't want to die. This wasn't the same with Madara and the suicidal jutsu. He had nothing left then, no friends, no country, nothing. Now, when he had finally found a reason to want to live, he wanted to see his friends so much. Even if he had to wait for a long time only to see their baby selves, even if he would be old and wrinkly by the time they can comprehend just what he had done for them, even then. I want to live. I want to live. I want to live. The mantra looped itself in his head. He struggled for a few seconds before his body gave under the influence of the seals. Then the dark took him. "It's a failure." A strange woman interfered. "The Senju head lives. That is as far as we got. Rat won't tell us anymore." Ha! The man on the lounge twisted his whiskery mustache with one meaty hand. "You hear that?" The boy sitting at the feet of the lounge was a midget compared to this mountain of a man. He nodded at the man's question. His curly hair shook with the motion of his head. "It's no good. Now what are you waiting for?" The boy rose slowly, keeping his body demure in its every gesture. He clutched his pet to his chest, a bunny with fur as white as his hair and eyes as pink as his, and then he walked out of the room. The servant waited until he could no longer hear the boy's footstep through the thick wood door, then he stood up, bringing his hand to his sword hilt. "No, don't kill him yet. That's such a waste of young meat." The man shifted his body again. His head bobbed on the vast expanse of his shoulders. His plan would have succeeded if it weren't for the unknown woman. "He's a danger to you and your line." "Ha! When has anyone's plan ever gone accordingly? He's a child still. He plans as a child does, without any consideration to things beyond his vision. The man patted his thigh. Let him live for a little while. People will look at him and think he's my heir. He'll be the perfect decoy they want while I groom my real heir somewhere else. The servant nodded. Besides, I still have some use for those Senju mongrels. Let them keep the Uchiha upstarts at bay. If I'm too soft with them, they'll start thinking themselves the kings of peasants. Ha, that's how you deal with dogs, Tora. That's how you deal with them. You keep their bitches on one side and you waggle your bone in their faces. They'll pant whichever way you want them to. He leaned to one side of the lounge, reached out with his hand and lifted a smoke pipe from the side table. He brought the pipe to his lips, drew in one long inhale, puffed out a cloud of smoke. The servant tilted to one side to dodge the incoming white cloud. Now, Tora, what was I talking about? You know that my mistress wants to name her cat after you. Thought you're a terribly handy man. Ha, Tora, what a name for a cat. What a bunch of harpies. The man prattled on, buoyant on the high of opium. Tora simply stood and nodded periodically to his lord's now mindless prattling. Outside of the room, unseen and unheard by them both, the boy sat with his back against the wall. The marble floor was cold under his bare feet. Up ahead, his bunny hopped along the empty hallway. The child's shoes it wore on its hind legs made it slip one paw after the other. Quote, quote. Blood stasis seal. All good. Opening section B. Focus. Focus. The head medic barked at the paling assistants. Heart rate. Heart rate stable. If you're going to puke, do it outside. I'm good. Section B opened. I can't believe it. We can see it now. Just keep your scalpel in the clear. Don't touch those ligaments. Give me a good B. P. We're going in now. She's 105/68. Steady as a rock. Whoa. This is Ruarg. Shit. He puked. Get him out. Get him out of the array. Someone screamed, the sound shrill and shocking in the room. Someone shut that bastard up. He's messing with my sig. What's the reader? What are you waiting for? Give me a read. I need a read. Now. Yoshinobu. That doesn't show up on the monitor seal. What is it? It's breathing. Quote. She's not human. Shut your yapping. She's got an unknown Kekai Genkai. We may find anything inside her. Get me a clamp. We're taking it out. That should just. Wait. What are you doing? No. Don't touch it. He woke up in a puddle as big as a lake, drowsy, in pain, and possessed absolutely no clue as to where he was. It was definitely not anywhere near the Senju compound though. He had been lying face down in the lake puddle. The water was in his mouth, his nose, his ears. He coughed them out, sat up on his legs, then wiped his face with his hands. He was wet, cold, and tired. Where was he? He looked up. There was nothing but water and open skies, but there was a lot of water running all the way to meet up with the red copper skies in the horizon, water clear and flat like a mirror made of liquid, like someone had shallowed out the ocean and this was all that was left, a little sea of water no higher than his waist even when he was sitting. There was also something else. A hole, abyssal in size, fathomlessly dark and foreboding in depth. And instead of sitting on the ground like any normal gulf of earth should, this one sat in the air itself. The skies above it swirled in violent strips of red and white cloud before descending into its mouth. It swallowed the running water in one unending gulp. And now that he noticed it, even the gurgling sound of running streams seemed muted around it. He sat still for a few heartbeats, filled with a sense of unease. It was as though he was sitting inside a bottle made of skies, cloud, and water and that hole was the only exit. Was this a dream? Was he dreaming? He'd like to believe he was, but the cold bite of water on his skin seemed too real and the space too vast for such fantasy. He leaned on one arm and was about to stand up when the world tilted suddenly. He slipped on his arms, yelling in surprise. The water coiled and swirled violently around his legs, sweeping him toward the awaiting abyss. A sudden fear spiked through him. Whatever that thing was, he did not want to go anywhere near it. He gripped his fingers into the slippery ground below, slipped again. If this was a dream, then it was far too real for his liking. He thrashed his legs in the water, pinched his fingers deeper into the ground and barely managed to slow down. The abyss was silent, looking at him through the water. Then it sighed. And the sigh was a slow, undulating, and breathy sound that emitted from within its dark depth and floated to him like a lover's caress, like a promise full of feathers in the dark and black hands on his eyes and wet touches on his face. And it was all he could do not to let the fear eat him from inside out. She's awake. A hand was holding his face up. Another hand pulled up his eyelid. Yellow light exploded into his vision. A wet fuzzy cloth was brought to his nose. The smell of piss seared straight into his brain and jerked him fully awake in a split second. He shot out his hands. One gripped the wrist, one seized the vulnerable throat above him. He heard yells of surprise and someone screaming, "Don't move! Don't move!" Ignoring the order, he pinched the throat veins, then jerked up his knee into the soft stomach, heard a grunt and complimenting gasps. He dragged the pliant body over him. Only then, with the whimpering meat shield covering him from possible attacks, did he have the leisure to slow down and figured out what was going on. He blinked his eyes a few times to adjust to the light. The first thing he saw was the pale face of the medic apprentice whose throat he was clutching. Please let me go. I swear I won't hurt you." The kid whimpered, already near to tear. He swept his eyes past the boy's gangly frame, over the room, taking in the bunch of medics huddling in one corner. One of them stepped up, holding his hands palms out in surrender, the head medic Kenji. "Call back your chakra," he said, sounding and looking far calmer than his shaking peers. "You succeeded. I failed. Call back your chakra. And please, that boy is going to die if you don't release him soon." He hesitated for a moment before loosening his hold on the apprentice. The boy dropped to the floor in a sobbing heap. The medic pulled the boy up from the floor, patted him, and then sent him to the door. "Go tell the clan head we're ready." Naruto waited till the apprentice was gone before fixing the medic with a look. "Explain," he ordered. "We failed. The stasis seal keeper fainted in the middle. We couldn't do anything with all that blood." He pointed to a vat below the gurney. "That's all yours." Naruto startled at the sight of the bathtub-size vat filled with red liquid. He should have been dead if he lost that much. "We found this embedded in your spinal cord. The moment we got them out, you started healing on your own." There were several heartbeats when Naruto stared at the contents of the petri dish presented to him, unsure of what to do. "Have any idea what it is?" the medic asked. "No. Yes, but he didn't need the inevitable drama if the Senju were to know what those little blue glinting shards inside that glass dish were. The remains of Shadime's necklace, made from his chakra. He watched as they slowly disintegrated into the air, their strength depleted. Was this why his Yuki-based regeneration hadn't worked as it was supposed to? He had used the necklace pieces as a one-time anchor point in suppressing the roaming bijus, clearing the path for him towards Madara. More than that, was this why he was so conveniently dropped into Hashirama Senju's garden, which was probably the only place that could give him a chance of survival? Was this also a part of the Great Toad Sage's scheme? He gave these speculations a few seconds of thoughts before pushing them aside. Speculations were fine, but this not the time for them. This whole thing was not yet over. He pushed the dish away and sat up on the gurney. "That's all very interesting, but more importantly, what's with the seal?" He gestured at the chakra-drenched and humming walls. It felt as though they were trying to push him in. "We've been trapped here for 3 days. When your chakra went haywire, we thought you were going to explode." So there were sensors among the Senjus. He had no idea how deep they can read, or even if his screwed-up chakra system could be read at all, but apparently they had interpreted the Yuki released from his massive regeneration as a danger signal and had sealed him in along with the medics. He eyed Kenji and the Senju medics' haggard faces. They had been waiting for their death sentence to fall for 3 days and 3 nights. They probably didn't dare sleep and had little to eat. The tiny vindictive part of him scoffed at the medic's plight. Good. Now these bastards knew how he'd been feeling for the past month, but he wasn't one to hold grudges. Cheer up. You're still alive, he told the medics as he looked out of the door. The seal on the wall whined a high note before dying down. Sounds from outside started floating in. He heard men's yelling, the whining and wailing of women. Were the wives waiting outside? Footsteps, a whole herd of them. He sat up straighter, dangled his feet from the gurney edge, and waited for the cue. He'd rather jump right off and started testing his body, but that would probably push at the already skittish senjus outside. Now that he was healed, it would be far harder for them to do any harm, but once all was said and done, this was still the cradle of the future Konoha. Naruto obviously couldn't do anything to them. The possibility of both a good and a bad reaction stirred both eagerness and anxiety in him. He didn't have the slightest idea what the Senju head had in store for him. Would he uphold their deal or did he already change his mind? The ruckus took a while to die down, and when it did, the Senju head himself came in through the door, flanked by his usual entourage of white masks. He eyed the medics, then Naruto, his face unreadable. Now no longer distracted with his operation, Naruto could see that he had recovered from the poison worm incident. His face had lost that skeletal look, and his body filled out the armor appropriately. He looked more like the third Hokage now than ever, and the resemblance unnerved Naruto. Yoshizawa let the lower-tier medics and the apprentices leave, keeping only Kenji and another behind. Then he turned to his unwelcomed house guest. Well, let us see the result then. Naruto made no reply. He stared at his feet for about a second, then, very slowly and carefully, he slid off the edge of the gurney. He felt the cold touch of the stone floor under his soles first. He really was healed. Then a shocking pain when his face met the hard floor with a loud thwopped. If anybody laughed then he didn't notice. He glared at his sprawling legs over his shoulders. It was all for naught. It had been too long. His muscles had atrophied, and the rehabilitation would take months. Months that he had neither the patience nor the tolerance for. He glanced at Yoshizawa, saw the man looking back at him still with the blank expression, then he concentrated on his legs. He tugged at the nature chakra inside him first, a minuscule amount compared to his bottomless reservoir, but it was enough to safeguard him for now. Then he opened his Yuki. One white mask tensed, but the Senju head gave no order. Yuki surged through him like a thorn river, wrapping itself around his legs. His legs burned. The muscle cells inside started cannibalizing themselves to make place for newer cells. The pain whitewashed his vision. He bit his lips and didn't make a sound. He'd be damned if he appeared weak in front of these chauvinistic pigs. Move. God damn you, move, he heard himself saying. His body moved on its own, curling, coiling, and heaving with effort. More pain. Pain that blinded him, that made his ears bleed and spread his mouth in a rush of inhale-exhale and an almost keening moan. Pain that made him want to drop down and give up, but God damn it all. He can't stop until he saw Madara Uchiha on the floor with a Rasengan hole in his chest. And all of a sudden he was standing up against the gurney, blinking and breathing in and out in heavy wet pant. He saw the Senjus in a circle around him, saw their full attention on him. He smirked at them. You see that, motherfuckers, you see that? There, under the watchful eyes of the Senjus, he took his first step. Pain blossomed in little white flowers in his vision, but he pushed on. Second step now. His body bobbed and leaned from the gurney, his hands still fastened on its edge for support. Don't fall. Don't fall. He stopped momentarily, sucked in one big breath, then let go of the gurney rail. The world wavered for about a second or so, before righting itself. His thighs and shins trembled minute convulses under the strain of his body. Third step. Some of the white masks in front of him backed off. Somehow, they had lost their giant frames, like they had shrunk in height and mass both right in front of his eyes. The dome room too seemed to have shrunk to midget size in a matter of minutes, and it was now suddenly too small for him. He looked past them to the shining door. He checked back at Yoshizawa, saw his cold fish face once again. Oh, what the hell? If they wanted to stop him, they should have done so earlier. He staggered, slow and easy, old boy, slow and easy, one step at a time towards the door. The light shining through it crooned a beckoning him only he could hear. No one interrupted him. No hand grabbed at his arms to pull him back. He passed the arched frame on step number 14. And suddenly the world exploded in a brilliant show of colors and sound right before his eyes. He stood stock still for a while, just leaning on the door frame and looking up at the open blue skies, so vast, so high, with absolutely no end he could see. Ignoring his protesting legs, he dipped his knees and with one bound he was high up in the air. He was so caught up with the indescribable rush of the jump that he nearly missed the treetop he was aiming for. The crowd below hissed their gasps, shouts, and whispers. Their faces a blur of colors and beady black eyes. The treetop offered him a view both high and wide. It was fresh morning like it was 3 days ago when they carried him into that brick and mortar tomb, and the sun was just starting its climb up the misty blue horizon. The air was sweetly fresh, and only when he had sucked in a lungful of it did he realize just how foul the vapory congeal of his room was. The forest had long since changed into its fall coat, a leafy sea of auburn, honey brown, and burgundy, and it whispered its crisp, "Hello," to him. "You're alive, and you're back home. Welcome back. Yeah, I'm still kicking, ain't I?" He paused, expecting somebody to voice their objections out loud, but no one did. The motley crowd down there hadn't quite caught his murmur, and the only bastard who. A bark of laughter tore through him so sudden it surprised even him. Ferocious joy sparked like a bullet in his belly and ricocheted inside him until he was so full of it he had to laugh. "Did ya hear that? I'm alive. I'm fucking kicking it, and it's fucking fantastic." He waved his hands in the air as if to demonstrate. "In yo face, Madara. Who's bitch now, huh? I totally owned you. Owned you and your wheelie weasel face. Ya hear me?" He roared with laughter, spinning on the tree top, kicking his hands and feet wildly. He howled and yelled. He was mad with joy. He felt like he was going to float all the way up to heaven if somebody didn't nail him down right now. On second thought, fuck stopping, this felt even better than jacking up on meth. He needed to do something now or he was going to explode right there. Rasengan. No, too small. Rasen's hurricane. Instead of the football-sized spiked orb, a sphere as big as his room roared into existence. He screamed with laughter right back, flinging his hands about as if to embrace it. "Old bastard, I never thought I'd see you again." Dimly, his ears registered yells below, but he hardly paid them any attention. He was staring past the mammoth Rasenshuriken at the skies above, once baby blue but now rapidly darkening to a stormy blue-gray. The vortex of his chakra was eating up all the wind in the area. Lightning rumbled once, twice, streaking across the skies in flashes of brilliant white. Then water poured down from the skies. This new unexpected event, instead of alarming, only managed to spike him further up on his high. The tiny part of his brain that was still rational observed that his Rasenshuriken, because of its sheer size and power, had disturbed the wind streams and air temperature of the whole valley, and this abrupt rain was the result. What a phenomenon. He'd have to do more experiment with what else it can do, but right now, he couldn't care less. Bathed in the rain of his own making, dark morning skies above him and panic cries below, Naruto had never felt more alive. He spread his arms wide in a one-sided embrace, bent his neck and lifted his face skyward. He closed his eyes and opened his mouth, sucking in the tremors of sensations racing through him, from his tongue, his skin, his eyes, his ears, his nose, from every lungful of life pumped into him, each and every one of them confirming again and again that he was alive and that he was whole once again. If left alone like that, he didn't know how long he would have stood there, lost in the sensations of his newly reclaimed body, but as it was, somebody interrupted. He heard a hiss behind him, and before he could blink, his whole torso and his left hand were bound tight. He whipped his head back, free arm high up, ready to pull his supercharged Rasenshuriken down onto the head of the fool who. 30 feet below, Hashirama Senju stood in the rain, hands up in a monk's prayer seal. Come down, he said coldly. The clan head is not finished with you. Every inch of the boy's body screamed hostile, but the branchless, leafless tree holding him wasn't crushing, and inside his sleeve a wooden tendril wrote onto his skin. To top it off, it was writing in the too formal for the occasion kanji, and it had perfect penmanship. You're scaring them. Come back. A quick sweep of eyes told him all he needed to know. Hashirama stood alone in the stone yard. Far behind him and protected in the shade were the human flies, drawn out by the smell of blood. Crossbows, slings, throwing wands, hands clasped in preparation. They were about to take him down while he was distracted. If the Senju boy hadn't, well, he wouldn't have died, not with his insane regeneration rate, but Hashirama didn't know that, and it would have hurt like hell with all that spikes, hooks, and poison no doubt. He locked eyes with the clan heir. Run or stay. Drop the big raw. That ought to take out half the valley at this size, and hightailed out of this place in the commotion. He can't kill them now, but if anyone died in the stampede, then it was their fault for being weak and nosy bastards. Waiting to see if Yoshizawa Senju would keep his promise would be stupid. He was not welcomed here. He had nothing to gain in staying. Run now, think later. He gripped tighter onto his Rasenshuriken, but moments before he could lug it down, the wood tendril dug into his arm. Naruto. He jerked in surprise. This was the first time the Senju heir had ever used his name, in private or with audience. A thought flashed across his mind. He'd get the boy in trouble. Shit. His eyes went from Hashirama to his father, who was standing in the shade, calmly observing them, the mad woman and the foolish son who brought her troubles to the clan. He knew he had lost before the debate even started. Whatever he wanted to say about it, he lived now because of this boy, and this obviously wasn't how Naruto Uzumaki repaid a life debt. He released his grip. The Rasenshuriken whooshed and howled in protest of its unsatisfactory death, but instead of dissipating into the atmosphere like all nature chakra-based techniques, its raw bulk followed the beacon of his suppressed yuki and slowly poured back into him. He slumped down, drunk on the chakra influx. The unnatural tree holding him moved, drawing itself back to the earth and him with it. On its other end, Hashirama was keeping up his, "You're the enemy of my clan, bitch," act, except that the boy never cursed. Tsunade, I hope you know the things I do for your grandfather. I hope you're going to pay me back for it. I hope you're gonna pay me back with a whole fucking ramen restaurant. He thought bitterly moments before voluntarily putting his head back into the sack. His gaze slid to Yoshizawa. In stark contrast with his fellow clansmen, the Senju leader wore an almost nonchalant air about him, as if he didn't just see a supposedly weak medic performed an S-class jutsu and was inches away from nuking his home with it. That was the face of someone who had a damn good trump up his sleeve. Already, Naruto could feel his exhilaration trickling out of him as the disquiet flowed in. Boy, wouldn't he feel like a fool if that trump turned out to the Senju clan head's own son. The moment his feet touched the wet stone ground, the Senju nins closed in a tight circle around him. He threw them a disinterested look as he held out his hand for the handcuff seal. He was back in his prison room again. The gray wall with one window and the bed greeted him with all the allure of a wriggling worm in the core of a bitten apple. There was no way to go back, that he knew. Outside of his room, his seals alerted him to the presence of foreign seals being put down. There was nothing to do but wait, and through this was clearly a step backward to him. Naruto wasn't yet at his corner. He was prepared for even this. If there was one good thing from his self-induced mania in the last month, it was that he was prepped up to his teeth. His chakra node littered the Senju underground halls and barracks, deposited very early on by his scouters, unseen by anyone but him. In the case that things turned nasty, Yoshizawa Senju would find out, at his own cost, that he would be fighting his own house instead. Naruto truly hoped that it wouldn't come to that, but if push came to shove, he wouldn't hesitate again. If push came to shove, he'd take out Hashirama Senju himself, seal him, then deal with the mess unhampered. These people might be the forefathers of Konoha, but there was too much at stakes here for him to let a few archaic ninja lords push him around however they wanted. Though he preferred to keep certain events as they were in the original timeline, there was no denying that the future would change, and change very dramatically if he had any say about that. There was no use kitten-footing around the issues. The people of this time lived a brutal lifestyle. To be able to deal with them, he too would have to be brutal. As long as Hashirama Senju was alive and the younger generations of the Senju untouched, he'd make sure that Konoha rose from the ashes of its father. Whatever it took, he would make sure it happened. He was jolted from his thoughts by the feel of a coat being draped over him. He looked up, blinked. He hadn't noticed that he was still standing in wet clothes, barefooted. Sit down, Hashirama ordered. The boy took from his coat sleeves, which had practically become the magical bag of smuggled goods for the past 2 weeks, a pair of cloth flats. He knelt in front of Naruto, lifted his right foot from the floor, slipped on the shoe, then did the same to the other foot. He stared at the boy's attire and the row of scrolls and kunais strapped to his back and thighs. Mission. A perimeter seal twang in alarm a few meters from his door. Young males. Fully armed. They were waiting for their leader. A full 4-man combat cell. The boy's mission would be a long one then. His mind grappled at this new piece of information. Go, he told the boy. They'd get suspicious if you are in here for too long. Hashirama nodded wordlessly before rising to his feet. Tonight, thought Naruto. He'd wait until tonight for Yoshizawa's verdict, and if it didn't come or if it wasn't what they agreed on, then he'd break out. Tonight, when Hashirama was gone at a safe distance. He can't stay here. There were too many things to be done, too much preparation to make. Madara, for once. If that bastard died, then the majority of their problems in the future would be cleared off. Then the bijus which needed to either be destroyed or sealed off in a safe location lest they became weapons of war once again. Kakuzu of Taki. The budding ninja clan of the future reign. Not to mention, he had to start scouting this world. He needed to create a spy network that spanned the continent, planted his own agents in the current courts of power, had an eye and an ear in all the hotspots of this time if he wanted to stay one step ahead and do what he planned. In war, good information was sharper than any swords. However, he looked up then, and saw the Senju clan heir near the door, his back to him. His inside suddenly lit up with fear. Wait, he heard himself saying. What if he dies? Came the unwanted thought. None of his plans accounted for the case if the future Shadaime were to die a premature death. It hadn't happened in the original timeline, but events had changed. He had no way of knowing for sure that what he had done, saving Yoshizawa, for once, wouldn't come back in a ripple and kill the sun instead. Whoever was aiming for Yoshizawa's head, what if they tried for the sun's where they failed with the father? What if they did it right on this mission? Naruto wouldn't be there to safeguard him, or even to heal him. If that happened, his hope, his Konoha, would die along with this boy. Naruto couldn't stop the shiver that ran through his spine at the thought. What to do? Kidnap the boy? Ridiculous. Hashirama Senju needed to stay with his clan for the birth of Konoha to take place. Secretly following the boy to protect him at a distance was also out. With his mammoth reservoir and with this many ninjas surrounding the clan heir, many of which ought to be censors, Naruto'd be discovered in a matter of hours. He could take tactical use of his now female body, seduced Yoshizawa Senju, became his mistress to stay close and keep a watch on the. No, absolutely not. Perish the thought. Now. The idea of getting anywhere near that blasphemous copy of the third Hokage, of being touched by him, filled Naruto with disgust. He wouldn't be able to do it despite his extensive experience with the no jutsu. He wasn't gay, female body or not. And he planned to reclaim his original male body anyway, so that wouldn't work for the long term. Could he watch the air from afar then? Maybe leave a shadow clone in a nearby village as an alarm? No. The clan's secrecy would prevent him from getting any information fast enough to act. There was no way around it. If he were to keep the future Shadaim safe, he'd need to stay within the Senju clan compound itself, but was staying here really an option? Was it really with the way these Senjus lived, clustered together in a dump in the forest with their kunais pointed out at the world, if he stayed here? Madara. Naruto. He blinked, torn from his thought loop. His gaze slid over the boy's face, suddenly landing on his throat. His bare throat. An idea flashed into his mind. He held up a hand before concentrating his chakra into it. A shining blue Rasengan came into existence. Not enough. The seal on his body up his arm to pull into his palm, holding the chakra stable. The Rasengan swirled faster, morphing into a mini Rasenshuriken. Still not enough. He crushed the little ball with more chakra, stoking its vortex into a violent spin until it collapsed into itself and shrunk down to the size of a marble. The now crystallized rosin ball dropped to his palm. He brought it to eye level, turning it one way and other, looking for possible mistakes. Good balance, round smooth shape. And it was pretty enough to pass as a trinket of sorts. Satisfied with the fruit of his labor, he tossed it to Hashirama, who caught it with one hand. Lucky charm. Don't lose it. He wasn't his father, who, with only a chakra node on a kunai, could monitor a perimeter of 5 meters of the surrounding area. His chakra was too large that all others felt like specks of dust on his senses. The fine points of chakra sensing were lost on him. However, the seal inlaid into the Rasenshuriken marble would take care of that. The amount of chakra infused into the ball would ensure that it would last for years, as it acted as a semi-barrier and a danger alarm. In the case that its wearer was in critical condition, it would teleport him straight to Naruto. That would have to be enough. Any more and he would be interfering. He looked at the blue marble, a tiny child's toy, rolling in Hashirama's hand. He should have made it in a different shape, with a hook of some sort to be worn as a necklace, but this was the only shape he could do. Don't lose it, he repeated, worried that Hashirama would put it in a box instead of carrying it with him. Keep it close. He stood up from the bed, and then looked at the shadow looming outside his door. Their time was up. Next time we meet, you better show me your dream. Then he pushed the boy out. He waited till dark fell, sitting cross-legged on his bed, staring at the outside. He spent the first hour of waiting on his legs, testing it, wiggling the toes, bending the knees. They were good as new now that the pain had left. He cleaned himself in the bathroom, relishing in the euphoria of being able to take care of himself once again. Mealtime was delivered as usual, but he did not touch it. He did not bother getting out of his room, for he knew the moment he stepped so much as a toe past the threshold he'd tripped up the 100 of alarms under the stonework. So, he sat on his bed, resisted the urge to bounce around like a monkey on crack just to show that he can, and eased his mind into meditation. The clock ticked away by sunlight, then a weak moonlight, then the night cue call of the Senju servants. He sat and watched them, and waited. When it was finally too dark to see with either the moon or the stars, the witching hour as they called it, the door creaked open and in stepped the Senju clan head himself. For once, Yoshizawa was completely alone, his usual posse of bodyguards nowhere to be seen. He looked at Naruto from the doorsill, his face scraped off of any expressions, and with a swing of his hand, he tossed a bundle towards the bed. Put that on, he commanded as he deposited something else on the floor before exiting. Naruto picked up the bundle from his lap. It was a set of standard Senju uniform in cream white medic color, but without any visible Senju insignia. Something spiked in his stomach. So easy, he thought. He checked the armors thoroughly for any kind of foul plays, from the inseam of the neck to the inside of the chest plate, and only when all had come up clean did he put them on. He pulled off the pair of cloth flats Hashirama had smuggled to him and stuffed them between the layers of his shirt. Then he put on the walking sandals provided to him. He wrapped the bandages around his pant legs to keep them from getting in the way, but he left the billowing sleeves alone. If he needed to modify his hand seals on the run, then the bandages would only get in the way. He took a few more minutes inspecting himself, adding a few rudimentary protections of his own here and there before walking out. Yoshizawa waited for him by the door, and the moment he saw Naruto, he turned without any explanation and started walking. Naruto followed him silently, pacing himself at a distance far enough to intercept any ambush but also close enough so that he couldn't be intentionally dropped off somewhere. The two of them passed the long underground hallways, then passed the staircase matrix, Yoshizawa at the front with a torch light and Naruto at the back. It was with much surprise that Naruto stared at the main gate and the moonless skies opening up above him. In front of him, the Senju clan head stopped, stepped to a side, then gestured at the wide-open gate with his torch-bearing hand. "We had a deal," he said. "Finish it." Naruto stared hard at the gate, then at Yoshizawa's face, looking for any hints of the trap about to spring up under him. As far as he could see, the gate was clean. On top of its walls, flames of torchlight danced in the dark. The Senju gatekeepers stared down at him from above. The illusion was shattered. They no longer looked at him the way they did when he was just a pale, sick slip of a woman, helplessly trapped to her bed. He had shown them that he could be dangerous, was dangerous. From them, he detected no spike of chakra or ill intention. It was useless standing there waiting for something to happen. Decide, now. Without any indication of what he was about to do, without even a bend of the knees, he flung himself past the gate and into the wood outside. A few gatekeepers tensed at his sudden movements, but none moved from their spots. He meant to jump all the way to the tree line, but at halfway, he skid to a stop. He turned back. Behind him, the tree hummed their windy, leafy song. He was outside, unharmed. Directly across from him, Yoshizawa Senju stood within the gate, looking back at him with a rose eyebrow. "You serious?" he muttered disbelievingly. "Not even a seal to keep me from squealing your clan secrets?" Yoshizawa answered him with a sneer. "Someone who can throw in with my foolish son, probably doesn't know how to backstab her savior, and, who would believe a woman such as you?" Then the gate closed, the genjutsu snapped shut and Naruto could see him no more. He stood still, for a while not yet believing that it could be this easy, but that moment passed and suddenly he was feeling like a giant, like he could run the world over as many times as he wanted. He was free. He gazed into the dark wood. A dirt path twisted its length between the trees. Then he turned and looked back at the Senju mountain. There was nothing there but more trees and upsloping earth. Higher above, clumps of human fireflies dotted the mountainside. A burn rose in him. He was once again leaving his home. And what more, he was forbidden from ever returning. He gave a barking laugh at the thought. Like hell he would let that happen. Like hell he'd let an old geezer with half a foot in the grave stop him from coming home. Though, this was not yet his home, and now was not the time to cling to it. He was the wayward son at the beginning of a long road to find protections for his homeland. When the time was right, when Konoha was Konoha, then, by hook or by crook, by whatever it took, he would come home once again. With these thoughts in his head, and his heart full of hope, Naruto stood at attention and saluted the part of mountain that would one day become the Hokage monument. In his mind, he could see the faces of the Sandaime, his father, and Tsunade staring down at him in farewell. He grinned his widest grin, and, without a thought that behind that genjutsu the gatekeepers were still watching him, yelled his goodbye to them. "Hasta la vista, baby." Then he turned, took the first step, and was swallowed up by the wood. Yoshizawa bent down and looked at the thing in the box. He looked at it long and hard before turning up to the person on the other side of the table. This was taken out from her body. The medic Kenji nodded affirmative. This was what prevented her from healing. Another nod. "It's alive." The thing stirred as if it had heard him. Its nostril, Tiny flaps of red meat flared as if it was sucking in air. I'm not sure if it can die. She was pregnant. The medic was silent for a while. The location is wrong. I cannot be sure of her physiology, but I think it might be a twin. The Senju head stilled in hesitation. He wanted to ask how but ultimately decided against it. He settled for studying the thing instead. He was not unfamiliar with its kind. He had seen them before, from women who didn't want to keep their shame. They were usually abandoned in all kinds of places. In the dumpsters, in the fields, in fish markets, even public restrooms, but those were dead. This thing, on the other hand, was functioning just fine outside of its mother. He coaxed its mouth open with one finger to reveal a full set of teeth, 4 of which were fangs. He drew his hand back, wiping the slime off the finger. Though they had cleaned the blood and body fluid off it, it remained moist and red. The way a fetus should, he supposed. It lied inside the box, not much bigger than a man's hand. Its supine body curved around its head, which was almost as large. One tiny beginning of a hand was up to its mouth as if in parody of a human enfant sucking on his thumb. Though it mostly stayed still, there were moments when tremors ran under its thinly stretched eyelids, as if it were dreaming. What an abomination! And how fitting of its creator. Yoshizawa drew himself up, closed the lid on the box, sealed it in stasis. Then he turned to Kenji. It had been a rough time for you. Go home, have a break, spend some time with your wife and children. I'll take care of everything else. The medic rose to his feet, bowed to him in relief before hastily exiting. Alone in the room, Yoshizawa drew the box into his lap and his ears to the silence. 1 minute. 2 minutes. There, a sound. Steel slicing through flesh. A series of wet cough through a throatful of blood. It was done. He rose leisurely to his feet, taking the box with him. Instead of going to the door, he went to the back of the room and opened the gate of the hidden tunnel with a silent doden. He went in unaccompanied by his bodyguards. Tonight, they were busy. Just like Kenji, all the people present in the operation would have to be silenced. His special force, right now, were tearing through the compound, taking them in one by one. Within a few hours at most, they would have produced a number of appropriate corpses, clean, prepared, accounted for, and with the correct death wounds. They would be presented to their families and buried according to their ranks. He'd say a few lines, shared the grief of loved ones poisoned to death by the Rouge Kunoichi. And the families, just like the families of deceased veterans in the past, would be taken care of by the clan. And nobody would have to know. It was regrettable that they had to purge off so many promising apprentices and senior medics, but this was a secret too dangerous to be known by so many people. That woman was dangerous. With such dangerous beast, special weapons were required. He went deeper and deeper into the heart of the mountain, reaching the section only permissible to clan heads, then past even that to arrived at a secret chamber he had created himself. He entered it silently, stepping over open coffins, winding his way through shelves full of eyeballs in glass jars, several still beating hearts, and a few odd relics here and there. He stopped at the last shelf to put the box on it next to a blood-crusted sword. He took a few moments to take in the newest addition to his collection. Blood of her blood, flesh of her flesh, as were the requirements of any blood ritual. If she ever dared come near his brothers and sisters in the future, then it would be his greatest pleasure to reunite mother with child. With one last look, Yoshizawa sealed the chamber close before going back upstairs to the awaiting pandemonium of the purge he had designed himself, completely assured of his defenses against a possible enemy. He didn't know it, and in the many years to come, he still wouldn't know what it was he held in his hands that day. Not an unborn fetus, not a parasitic twin, not even an abomination of nature, but the remains of the original body of Naruto Uzumaki. When his son came home, Yoshizawa Senju was sitting on a mat in the main dojo. Ignoring the tug of the boy's chakra on his senses, he continued his supervision on the training chunins and genins. In front of him, on a sitting table, were a stack of reports from the southern region. He corrected the stance of a chunin and another genin's grip on his wooden bakken as he opened the top scroll. The yells and thuds of bodies and the sweaty smell of the dojo, instead of disturbing him, actually helped him better concentrate. As clan head for 20 years running, Yoshizawa was very used to multitasking. At the exact moment when he spread open the scroll, the little chakra dot that were his son passed the gate check and headed not to him to report but toward the stair to the underground halls. The boy was running, he realized. In no time at all, the dot was nearing that room. Yoshizawa made a noise deep in his throat. Here we go. He snapped the scroll shut, suddenly not feeling like hearing the whines of the leader of Uzumaki Aikizoku on paper. He closed his eyes and concentrated. For one split second, the dot flared into a ball, trembling angrily in his inner vision before regaining control of itself. It stayed there, in front of the room for a few minutes, wavering back and forth as if in disbelief, before exploding into action. The dot ran up and down the halls, circling over the servant and the medic quarters. Apparently not finding anything of worth, it flew up the stairs, running into the mess hall, hesitated there for a second then backtracked to the northern gate. It jumped out over the wall without even a notice to the gatekeeper dots, then it leapt up the mountain cliffs. There it wove through several spots, pausing to check at each of them. And when even that yielded no sight of what it was looking for, it started its frantic search again over the whole compound. By that time, Yoshizawa had seen enough. He opened his eyes and called an end to the practice session. On his log, there was only one more person. He called the ninja in, had a talk with him and ended up letting the Junin leave the barrack to visit his 9 months pregnant wife. He cautioned the Junin, Han, on the way out and even sent an accompanying team just in case. Requests such as these weren't rare lately. After a stressful time, his men needed their break. He dismissed his bodyguards from their posts, explaining to them that he needed some time alone. In his mind the dot had ended his search in front of the room. It stood there, bubbling up and down in size as though it couldn't decide what it was feeling. And what do you see that put you in such a state? Yoshizawa mocked in his head. He knew, not guessed, but knew exactly what the dot, his son, saw. Not an empty room, not even a room at all but just a box of dirt, its tenant long since gone. How did he know? Because he had done it himself. One big bonfire to incinerate the furniture, clothing, and supplies, anything she had touched. The bucket of ashes left he had dumped into the river. An A-class dodan to seal up the room forever. The few people other than him and his son who knew enough about her to talk could now only talk to the worms. Surely such extreme reactions were unbecoming from someone like him, the head of a major clan, practically royalty of ninjas. However, Yoshizawa had not got to where he was today by being meek and sloppy. That room was no longer a part of his house, he had felt. Others had agreed with him. Among the younger senjus, they called it the vine forest for the black slithering vines of seal so blatantly displayed like a stamp of ownership on the floor. It had been the stuff of dread for many genins and younger chunins who had come too close. Even Yoshizawa himself was wary, only coming near when he was armed with protections, and even then he never stayed for long. He meant to study and replicate such a unique seal once she was gone, but the moment he set foot to the heart of the room, he had known at once that that was not possible. Vine forest is the wrong name. He had thought as the hair on his neck rose up in pinpricks. It was no longer an architectural construction of 4 walls, a window, and a door, but something that breathed and lived, like a womb made of stone. And it smelled like her. He had stood amidst that invisible vapor, feeling each successive breath pushing his olfactory sense further into overdrive. It was a scent that brought to mind fantasies of those languid women made of dark honey, smooth and sweet and terribly sticky. And for a fraction of a second, when his sensory delirium reached its peak, he had imagined if he dug deep enough into the wall he might just find her there, alive and looking at him in the eye. On the bed, the indent of her body still remained. On the pillow were a few stray strands of golden hair. The sheets were unmade. Her clothes, still warm, lay discarded on it. The bathroom was still wet from the shower she took before leaving. She had stood there, in a little square space of 3x3, her hair down, eyes closed in bliss, and under running water. The chair was left jutted out from under the table and the table itself was slightly off its original post. She had sat there in wait, stood up and paced anxiously, then sat down again. Perhaps she had drummed her fingers on the table, her uncut nails hitting the wood in little, skitches sounds. And maybe she had pushed and kicked at it while she cursed him to hell in her head. In short, that woman had left her paw prints all over the place. A place that reeked of female, in the heart of a military barrack. Yoshizawa had flown out of that room so fast his head was still spinning when he gave the order to tear everything out, burn them, and bury the rest. He needed his temple to chase away the migraine that came with every thought of that woman, and when that didn't work, reached into his coat for the flask he always kept on hand, then swallowed 2 pills from it. He coughed the pills down, annoyed but resigned that his strength was slowly seeping out with age. Downstairs, the dot seemed to have finally decided on what it wanted because it stirred from its self-imposed vigil, and was heading here in a speed that indicated that it was running as fast as it could. Good, thought Yoshizawa, let it all end in one big show of fireworks. Without losing his sedate pace, the Senju clan head picked up his ledger from under the table, and from it unsealed 2 scrolls. He spread the scrolls next to each other on the table. The left scroll was full of words and diagrams. The right scroll was blank. He picked up a brush, checked if his inkwell was still wet, and started duplicating the scroll in neat longhand. He managed to get to the 4th paragraph when he opened the door and walked in without asking for permission. With his attention still on the scrolls, Yoshizawa opened their confrontation with a simple statement. I did not kill her. She left on her own. 7 days ago. For a while, Hashirama did not reply. The boy was judging whether he was telling the truth. A healer and a seal master of that caliber. She would have been an asset to us. And how do you suppose we keep someone like that in our clan, who are mostly men, let me remind you. As your whore maybe. He heard a single intake of breath. Let me count it for you. A healer, a Fuin master, and a wind adept with power the likes I've never seen before, not to mention an unknown Kekai Genkai that borders on invulnerability. And to top it off, female. That is at least Junin, but more likely clan head level. Someone like that should have had her name known in all 5 elemental countries. It's not likely that anyone would forget a face and attitude like that. How strange is it that we never knew of her until now? Your proposal, did you think someone like her would deign to stay and play house with a child like you? You're infatuated. Yoshizawa paused momentarily to dip his brush into the inkwell, careful not to let the ink drop onto paper. How funny, for a tree to try and catch the wind. Would you throw away everything that you are to chase after a passing stray? What would you tell your wife of this? Fiancé. Wife. Soon enough. 17 is a good age to start a family. The girl was Mito Uzumaki. Clan daughter, pretty in a plain way, and last he heard a budding talent at sealing art, but more important than any of that was her chakra, which was the perfect prison for the bijus. It was the match of dream. One bloodline to capture the beasts and one bloodline to imprison and harvest their power. This union would cement the partnership between the Uzumaki and the Senju and become the defense against any insurgency schemes by the more ambitious and purer of blood Senjus. It would be the clans, it would be Yoshizawa's bid to power and breakage from the daimyo's stranglehold control. Abruptly, Yoshizawa stopped writing. He looked up and saw the sun a few steps away from him, jaw jutted out, fists clenched, and looking at him with something between a frown and an all-out glare. Unbiddenly, a hot spark ignited in his stomach. The sight of such open defiance in those familiar brown eyes stirred from him memories of past grief and rage. The boy had inherited his mother's eyes, unremarkably brown and up-tilted in the corners. That woman, Makoto, his brain supplied the name readily, plain instead of beautiful, meek as a mouse, and disgustingly eager to please. Not someone a clan head would ever bed, much less marry, but she had come from old power, and in that time, having a name as backing was as good as having a whole army. Had the same eyes, and she had looked at him exactly like that and shrieked at him, "You bastard! You bastard! I'll kill you!" as they pulled the newborn out from between her slime-streaked thighs. She had had an exceptionally beautiful voice, as if to make up for her lacking of physical beauty. In his more lenient youth, he had, on some nights, tied her to the bed, laid his head on her belly, and let her sing him to sleep. Back in those days, he had floated to his dreams many nights accompanied by the melodic lullaby of her voice. But on that particular day, that voice had turned harpy-like as she screamed, "Get it out! Get it out of me!" and writhed not from the pain of childbirth but from the hundreds of vines, leaves, and wooden tendrils breaking through her skin, her nostrils, and her mouth. Even to this day, whenever he passed by what remained of her in the underground halls, he sometimes thought he could hear her still screaming her death throes. And now this wretched child dared to look at him like that. As if he hadn't been sneaking behind his father's back for months. Anger boiled in him. How dared he? Yoshizawa let the brush drop down the table with a clink, and, with a voice that betrayed none of his feelings, said to his son, "You've been missing practices. Every evening and even some mornings. And one night 3 weeks ago you didn't come back to your room. Where were you?" The boy said nothing. He let his silence do the talking. "You know where I was, father." They stared at each other, father and son, both knowing exactly what was on the other's mind. It was impossible not to. With the years Yoshizawa had kept this child alongside him, 17 years, counting the days since his son's monstrous birth. This was all because of that woman. A part of him growled angrily. He should have known she was trouble the first time he saw her, long before they had their little deal. Oddly enough, he remembered the day. Midsummer, the compound flowing with guests from other cousin clans. Hashirama had gone out with a pair of human feet, the remains of a successful mission, to bury only to come back with a whole human body. The boy had cornered him during a conversation with fellow clan heads, knowing that in doing so he'd force his father into giving hasty consent. Yoshizawa had taken one look at the bloody bundle in his arm, which no longer looked human but more like a slab of red meat attached with cut-off stubs that might have been a head or particularly misshapen limbs, and decreed that it was fine if the boy wanted something to play with, but until that corpse opened its eyes and proved that it really was alive, no clan resources would be wasted on it. No medic, no servant care. It was wholly the boy's responsibility. And that was that. Yoshizawa had thought that would be the last he'd ever see of it. Promising talent or not, his son was still a ninja lordling with servants at his beck and call, and he didn't think the boy would actually take up all the hassle of taking care of a filthy wasting human. He was wrong. It was a few weeks later that he had found this out. It was the night before he departed for a meeting with the fire daimyo. He had gone in search for his son out of curiosity of the boy's thinning presence in the main compound for the past several weeks. He had gone to the boy's room, empty, to his garden, empty and in slightly worse shape than it usually was, to the dojo, also empty. He had tuned in his sensory then, and followed the chakra traces to the West Wing infirmary, his mind's teeming with questions the like of, just what was his son doing in an infirmary? Odder yet, it was one of the lesser used one, reserved only for particularly grievous cases where secrecy or isolation was required. The hallway was dark when he had come to it, but the door was slightly ajar. The light flickered in and out from between the crack, the shadow of someone walking in the room. Even to this day, Yoshizawa did not know which part of him had cautioned against calling out for Hashirama in the dark hallway. Instead, he had walked in silence to the door, then stopped right in front of it, stunned at the sight offered him through the crack. A woman's body lay in an iron cast tub in the middle of the infirmary, head leaning on its curved lip, legs dangling out, and skin glistening in blood-red water. Yoshizawa had stood there outside of the room, too stunned to move for several minutes. Who? How? Why? Were the questions, and only with a few more minutes of calming down had he started to notice the field of lacerations and burns on her body, some of which were open and bleeding. His son knelt at her feet, one hand holding her thigh in place, one hand pulling the clumsy stitches from her black and purple skin. The boy was so absorbed with his work that he didn't even notice the momentary flare of chakra right outside the door. It was the corpse, Yoshizawa had thought, reeling at this information. The thing that barely resembled a human when he first saw it had somehow regenerated itself back to this. But this realization, instead of shedding light on his questions, only managed to confuse the Senju clan head further. He had rooted himself there, slightly disgusted and somehow afraid but also unable to move from that spot, and watched as his son washed the woman by hands, brushed her hair and cleaned her feet, dried and re-bandaged her, diapered and dressed her before putting her to bed, all of these done with an intense sense of patience, concentration, meticulousness, and tenderness he had never ever seen from the boy before. Why? Why was his son doing this? Why would he, a proverbial prince of ninja, lower himself to, well, that? What was the cause for such dedication? He went back to his room in a dreamy state of déjà vu, his mind empty of any answer. There wasn't anything to do. He had said yes, and with 40 years on the job, he had seen his fair share of odd hobbies. Besides, the daimyos waited. There was no time to get fuzzy with his home affair. Still, the woman's face stayed with him. Under soft candle light, she slept so peacefully, so unknowingly of the force with which she drew others to her. There was absolutely nothing woman about her. She did not talk like a woman, which should only be when asked of her. She did not act like a woman, which was to stay out of the way and in their proper places. She did not even look like a woman should, pleasant enough to be enjoyed for a few seconds but not too striking as to become a distraction to more serious matters. No, she absolutely did not look like how a woman should. Hers was a face that dominated weak minds, that forced men on their knees in worship and passed their boundary of sanity into obsession. It was a beauty as cruel and cutting as cold steel, sadistically brutal in its utter obliviousness. In the 2 months that her presence was known to all, discipline suffered. His clan was as a hive disturbed by a strange wasp, the way men without wives were disturbed by an errant woman in their midst. He had seen the way the younger, less experienced Senjus stood stock still at the sight of her through the window or the door, unable to pull their eyes away, practically licking at that face with their eyes, the way tongues worked at ice cream, with that typically stupid, single-minded expression on their faces that went with concentrated licking. He had watched as they shirked his caution to stay away and bent even when he ordered them. The older Senjus, though they had managed to dodge some of her effects on them, knew enough to steer clear of temptation. They hid in the shadow and watched her from there, torn between a maddening mixture of want and fear. Even the oldest and strongest of them, a man who had once been cubs along with Yoshizawa, had come to him pleading. Not a woman, Yo-kun. He had said to the Senju leader using the name they used when they were children. Please don't make me. Not that one. Not her. And Yoshizawa had understood perfectly what the man was trying to say with stunted words. Don't make me kill her. I can't. I can't ever. It was then that Yoshizawa finally knew just what he had been housing then. Demon. Witch. Yuko. The way her chakra seemed to swirl and collapse into a black hole on itself only managed to further convince him of this truth. And to add insult to the injury, this wretched creature was brought into his home, into his land by his own bewitched son. If Yoshizawa hadn't seen its first pathetic appearance with his own eyes, he would have attributed his son's behavior to that face. But the truth that he had seen it and was disgusted by it put a further stress on the question, why? But now, perhaps it no longer mattered. She was gone and she would never be back. Draw your sword, Yoshizawa said curtly, taking tiny relish at the way his son's eyes widened and his body stiffened when he saw his father picking up not a wooden bokken but a steel katana. Let us see how much practices you've missed. He stood up from his seat, didn't bother with safety mask and armor, and with 2 long strides, he was in front of Hashirama. Foregoing the formal bow, he opened their fight with a hissing sideways slash. Hashirama easily parried it. He followed it up with more slashes and a chest thrust. All delivered with practice's swiftness and wicked precision. He watched Hashirama's face. The boy was guarded. He was hesitating. Yoshizawa realized. What's on your mind? A diagonal two-handed coat sliced through the air a mere centimeter from his son's ear. Hashirama said nothing to his question. You're not giving it your all. Having second thoughts. 3 more close strikes, he was pushing the boy back. There was vicious triumph in that, but there was also disappointment. Yoshizawa took 3 steps back and from there he circled his son slowly, studying him from all angles. In the heat of battle, even the most closed-off warrior let out things they normally hid. He angled his sword down, its head nearly touching the ground, ready as he walked. You put her in the heart of your circle, didn't you? I always wonder why I knew so late what she was up to. Some errant servants. Junins and Chunins that forgot to report to me. How many of them swore fealty to you? Sideways slashed. Deflected. But Yoshizawa could see that he was spot on. Despite himself, he had to admire his son. The boy had a way with people. In spite of being feared for his demon-suppressing Kekai Genkai and his status as murderer of his own mother, Hashirama had still managed to seduce plenty of Junins and Chunins to him. This information acquired, Yoshizawa abandoned his post and went on furious offense. He pushed the boy back step by step even as he wore down his mind. You were trying so hard to protect that woman. What were you trying to do with her? A slash grazed Hashirama's cheek with a thin red line. But it doesn't matter now, doesn't it? She's gone and she's never coming back. All of a sudden, it was Yoshizawa who was stumbling back, sweating as he countered strike after furious strike. He stared into the boy's eyes, something burning behind it. Got your raw nerve, he taunted even as he blocked and took another step back. Hot rage swelled up within him. How dared this wretch do this to him, his father? And for who? A cunt with a pretty face. Yoshizawa swung his sword in reply, hitting the other katana in one noisy clang. This time he put his weight on it and kept both swords stuck there in between them. Through the crossed blades, he scoffed and whispered to the boy. After you finished washing her and putting her to bed every night, did you lay down next to her? He felt a falter immediately. On her. In her. He swung one slash upward. The other katana hung back in stupor, unable to prevent the clean path of steel up the boy's cheek, up further and past the widened eye, a popping sound deliciously sweet to Yoshizawa's ears, before ending its trajectory above his forehead. Yoshizawa stood calmly as his heir stumbled backward, screaming in pain and confusion. Blood and white gelatin poured from the boy's face. Yoshizawa sneered. Losing composure because of a little wound, his heir was a child still, but at least the boy was still standing up and holding his sword in a tight grip. I cannot fault your technique. You've certainly kept up your practice, he said as he wiped the blood off his sword. It is your heart that is weak. Then he resheathed it, turned his back on the boy, and walked to the door. He stopped halfway. A lifelong wound certainly was a lesson not easily forgotten, but the anger and frustration built up over the last 2 months still burned in his stomach. Though Yoshizawa was not one who easily gave into his emotions, this time, he couldn't resist squeezing his son's still open wound. I and that woman, did you know we had a deal? He said with a sneer. She never told you, did she? She was to leave the moment she was healed. For all the things you've done for her, she never once trusted you. Why? You don't even know her name. He heard the wounded silence behind him and knew that he had gotten what he wanted. He laughed at the utter stupidity of it all and resumed his walk to the door. He managed to take another 3 steps before he heard a quiet voice at his back. But I do know her name. What? The sword entered him so swiftly and so silently that he didn't even register the pain until he saw its head poking out from his chest. He turned his head back in shock and saw his son's face looking at him over his shoulder, his one single brown eye reflecting the light in pinpricks of red. Don't blame me, Father. The boy said to him, his voice suddenly far away, as if spoken through a wall. I'm a ninja. This is how you taught me to live.